Good evening and welcome to our second in a series of webinars on a glimpse into the classroom, and those classrooms being in Barbrick. Tonight we're going to be talking about pedagogies and teaching practices. And so what's a pedagogy? The word actually stems from a Greek word that effectively means the art of teaching children. And pedagogy is about the knowledge, beliefs and practices that teachers apply and use in their interactions with the students. And so our teachers, being very well qualified and very well experienced, have a wealth of these. And so you'll see that when we talk about that art of teaching, it's being able to choose the right instructional practice to match the child at their developmental level, at their learning level, at their style of learning, and what the teacher's wanting them to get out of the class from the curriculum. So there's quite a bit that goes into that. And so tonight I'm going to take you through some of the things that we do. The first one is knowing about the stage of development of students. And so in the junior school, there's two broad stages. The first one is prep to year 2, and you'll find here that we've just got our children in prep. They've just come out of kindergarten, and so that's a very play-based process of learning. And what we have them now doing is they're coming more into a classroom that's a little bit more activity-based, where there's a lot more work on concrete, using their hands to learn, to seeing things. And so what you'll see here, you'll see the explicit teaching model, which is one of our basic models that we use in the junior school. And the teachers here in these early years will do a lot of work on concrete material, showing rather than telling. And so the students can actually see through their learning what they're doing. And of course, there's an awful lot of scaffolding, a lot of support, and you'll find that the little steps of what they're learning in prep to year 2 are quite small compared to as they get a bit older, those steps can be quite large. As we get to the years 3 to 8, you'll see that children around the age of 3 start moving into higher order thinking, so the development leads them here. And so this is where students are moving from concrete to abstract thinking. And so that usually develops abstract thinking around about the age of 8. And this is where children can start understanding concepts, and they can think of a concept and apply it to different areas. So it might be multiplication of numbers. It might be the idea that when I add, all numbers get bigger. And if I do that with decimals, it also works. If I do that with fractions, it does. But it also might be where we're looking at explorers, and one explorer like Captain Cook set off to find more lands for the British Empire. So when they hear about Spanish explorers or Portuguese explorers, the idea is that they can apply that concept to, okay, so they were doing the same for their other countries, and therefore there was a bit of competition to see where we might get the greatest wealth for our nation by sending out explorers. Our pedagogy aims to move students' learning from probably what I think my learning was when I went to school, which was a lot of memorisation and a lot of comprehension. So being a Queenslander, one of the things I can remember having to learn, and we spent an incredible amount of time on it, was about learning the Sunshine Route, which was the path the train took from Brisbane to Cairns, and you had to learn all the cities going up the eastern seaboard of Queensland. And I look at that now and think that's an activity that children would Google in 5 minutes, yet I'm sure we spent weeks memorising those. So today our students need to be able to have higher levels of understanding because they're exposed to so much more information. And as the information age rapidly increases, for students to be great in society and to operate very well, they do need to have these higher levels of understanding. And see, these are the complex learning processes. And the graphic that we've got out of the side there, you can see the remember part is about name, describe, relate, find, list, write or tell. Understanding is about comparing, discussing, restating, doing a bit of predicting, which you would do with your science or with your English or your maths. But what we want to see is higher than that. We want to be able to see them to be able to apply or transfer skills. We want to see them to analyse, evaluate and create. And you will see that the verbs at the side there are reflective of those verbs we talked about in the first webinar about the Australian curriculum. And so you'll see now that we want students not just to be able to tell us something, we want them to be able to explain why their answer is correct. Can they identify something and investigate? Can they decide? Can they make decisions? And what did they base those decisions on? What was the information? What was the evidence? And for them to put all that information together into being able to create something. One of the things we do a lot of work on in the junior school is looking at that zone of proximal development. Now you'll see teachers, and a lot of them will do some pre-testing, and that's for them to understand the current knowledge of experience or understanding that children have. Now every child we have in the school is very different. They are coming from different families. There's different information that their families have spoken to them about. They might have watched different documentaries. Some might have gone to zoos, some might have gone to art galleries, museums, some have travelled. All of the things that families do together and the information that they give their children all form part of their prior knowledge. And so when teachers are talking about things and new understanding, it's important for us to understand what their prior knowledge is. And so we need to find that base on which we can build. And so teachers will do some pre-assessment here or pre-testing. And you might see in English and Maths, which is what I'm predominantly going to talk about tonight, the students will do some form of essential assessment. Now, it's important, parents, that you don't help them with this, because this is what teachers will base their teaching on and their planning. So they look at that and see where the children are, where the gaps are in their understanding. Are there any misconceptions here? And so they're all the things that will shape the lessons that they will then create for the students. The zone of proximal development is that next zone. So the first zone is where the children say, I know how to do this. They've got confidence in what they can do. And if we kept all of our teaching there, they wouldn't progress. So what we look at is the next zone. And this is where, with scaffolding, with small incremental lessons, with the teachers using their knowledge on how best to teach something, that they can move children here into new knowledge, into new skill building. And eventually you'll see, and I know that some of the children, even the ones that I've helped over the last few weeks, when we've got to something new, you can see they're all a little bit nervous about it. But 3 lessons in, they're all very comfortable. Okay, I can do this. And they're quite confident. And that zone of proximal development actually then becomes the current zone. And you can see then that these children are going further up. Now, some parents will question why some people in some groups are doing one thing and others are doing it in another group. And it's just like if we go back to, I want you to think back to your child when they're starting to crawl or walk. And you will see some kids who are starting to walk at 9 months and others don't walk until, well and truly after 1. But they all end up walking. And so we knew as parents then that if you've got a child who's still looking and they're still, hauling themselves up onto furniture and things like that, that they're not ready to just walk off by themselves or to run. And so we do an awful lot of holding their hand and doing all that support until they're ready to do that. So that last blue zone there, it's where it's a bit too far. They're just not ready for it. And even though we might be teaching it to them, there's nothing for them to actually bond onto here. It's a skill that's sitting out there by itself. And what we'd prefer to do is have the basis and the foundation that we build on there. And we like things that what we'd class as sticky learning. We want, when we teach something, we want it to actually stick and stick it onto some knowledge that you already have to start with. So there's always going to be that zone out there that's just too far. But what you'll see is this model here moves with the child. So where the zone of proximal development was, when they've got it, we move that model a little bit further to the right, And where we were in the zone of proximal development is now the current zone. And so you'll see these little steps as they go up. And this is the normal pattern of learning for students. So how do we do this? So to start with, we gather an awful lot of information on our students. And as I said, we do the pre-testing. We can look at analysis of work samples and see what they can do, what they can't do. There might be a test that they do. We have formative assessment going in the classroom all the time. So that can be from basic questioning. How are we going? Everyone with us? Anyone got any questions? How did you go here? Did everyone get to the next step? All of those questions are giving feedback and information to the teacher about how students are progressing. And I'm sure over the last 6 weeks, as you've been listening into classes, you would have heard an awful lot of those questions. So there's formative assessment. You can also have some mini tests that are formative assessment as well. It just means it doesn't contribute to a report card. And then we can also do audits of work samples. So it can be, they might have been given a bit of maths or a worksheet, the teacher gets that and goes, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. They might be adding up instead of going down, or subtracting up instead of subtracting down. It might just be a procedural thing that needs to change. We have a model that we operate, and the first one is for us to do that pre-testing, and I think you'll be fairly familiar with that with the essential assessments. From that, the teachers get those tests and they'll sit down and they'll analyse against some specific criteria for what they're wanting the children to be able to do and understand in their next learning. And what they'll do there is they'll then determine the needs. Now, as I said, we've got children have all different backgrounds. They're all at different levels. Some children come to school reading, others don't. Some children know their numbers, some don't. Some start off decoding very well, but then they reach their developmental goals and then they start to slow down. And so we develop the needs, determine those needs, and we might at that stage be looking at some groups. Then we develop the plans of how we're going to move all the students forward. We implement those plans and it might be over a series of weeks. We then do some kind of assessment, it might be formative assessment, to track their progress, to see how have they gone, have they got that. Once we've done that, we then again assess their new zone of proximal development and this cycle starts again. Differentiation is where we meet the needs of all students in the class. And as I said, they're all different. And so we can't treat them as all the same. So we will have some students in a class, if we did that, would be sitting there going, I don't know what's happening. They've got nothing to anchor it on. It's not sticky. You've got others who'll be sitting there going, I can already do this. And therefore they're not learning anything new. And so when a teacher is designing a lesson, they're also thinking specifically about the students they have in their classroom. And some have different needs. Some come from different educational backgrounds. Some might have a different attention spans or interests. Some have different language abilities, and others, of course, can have different cultural backgrounds. Now, each of these impacts depending on what the type of lesson is. So when we're looking at some Australian readers and Australian stories, there might have to be more information given to those students who are coming from different cultural backgrounds. The same as when we're doing stories from around the world, some students are probably going, I know all about that story, and they can provide some of that background for the students there. So each child contributes in that way, but teachers do need to plan for this. Here are some different strategies for differentiation. So the idea for differentiation is to be able to give every student access to their learning at their learning level. And so here we've got just a handful of some things that they might be wanting to do or teachers might use in differentiation. So different children might be at different level texts when they're reading. They might be in different guided reading groups. There might be a different strategy focus for those groups. Some might be in book club while others might still be on their basic readers. In writing, you might have some students who are doing sentences while others are moving into paragraphs. In maths, there's small group instruction, definitely. You've got some students who might have a number chart or a number line that might help them so that they're still doing the same as everyone else, but they might be able to refer to a number chart or some kind of anchor chart there for them to be able to still do the same amount of work. And I saw a great graphic of this a while ago, which was students all going, some kids going to the cricket or going to the football, if I use that analogy for Victoria. And the 3 students get in, and so that's called equality. They all have, they're all in at the football, but you've got one child who can't see over the fence. And so what you do there for equity is for them to give them a box or something so they can stand on, so they have the same access as the other students do to the learning. And so teachers will often differentiate in this way so that every child has access to that learning. Now, our teachers are incredibly experienced, and I know you all have seen this. And there are some different approaches to how they might teach. And all of these are in their toolbox. And depending on what the lesson is about or what they're trying to achieve or how they want to approach that, that will depend on which one they choose and to what extent they choose to do it. So the direct instruction model is our explicit teaching model that I do, we do, you do, which I'm going to go through with you in a minute. And that's where the teacher is out the front doing that explicit teaching or giving that instruction, and the students are following that, with the teacher being the expert in this area. You've got the other student-centred approaches, and these can still be used in our more formal subjects of English and maths, but there's a different focus here. And these might be used for open-end inquiries, often used in STEM activities, they're used in HASS. So if you've got an inquiry-based learning, this is where you've got students who are trying to answer a question, and it might be that as a group or a class, they are trying to find the answer out to something. And this is where the teacher facilitates this process. So they, it's in some ways probably a little bit more guided learning here, where they will guide the students towards coming up with a question, and from that point there they'll facilitate. And the students then are moving through with how they might do that. So it might be in science, it might be finding out if you gave them a cup and said, what's in the cup, and they said nothing, and you asked the question, is that really true? Could there be something in there you can't see? And so the students might then go about trying to work out what might be in there as a group, and they can work that out. You've then got cooperative learning, and cooperative learning is also here where the teacher is the facilitator. You can also have students as the facilitator, but then the teacher might delegate different roles or different parts to the learning. So if we're learning about a country, one student might be given about population, another one might be given about imports and exports, another one might be given about the customs and culture. So what happens there is they each form as part of a group, and the students all do their part, they're all responsible and accountable for their part, and then they all come back to share the information, and you'll often see that that's in the form of a presentation mode. The explicit teaching model is I do, we do, you do. And what it does here is it starts with the teacher being the expert and the teacher going through exactly what they want the student to do. And then with an awful lot of scaffolding and a lot of coaching and working through with the student, eventually the student is able to do this by themselves. So it's the gradual release model. And what you can see here in this graphic is you've got on the left here the teacher responsibility. So you've got the focus lesson where they're actually given the modelled instruction. And so they will go through giving an exemplar or taking the students through bit by bit. Then you do the shared instruction, and that's where we do it together. And so this is where the students will go through and the teacher will take them and they'll talk about it, they'll discuss different parts about it, why do we do this? So you really unpack what you're actually doing. Then you've got your collaborative part, and this here is where you've got guided practice. And here you've got the teacher as the person who is walking the students through what they have to do. So while they've modelled it, they've unpacked it, What you see here is the students are actually doing it, but the teacher in most cases would have been walking around the room and doing a lot of guiding with, now after we've got to the second line, what are we going to do here? Does everyone have that? Who remembers what we do next? There's all of those questions that go into that collaborative part. Then you've got independence. So when the teachers believe that, okay, I think we're right, you then can try and see if the students can do it themselves. And often at this stage, the children are wanting to have a go themselves, and this is where they've got their independent practice. So the responsibility of that gradual release model goes from the teacher through to the student. Just to break that up a bit here, you've got the I do it model. And so here you've got the direct instruction through the modelling. The teacher sets the goals and purposes, and at this point, the students actively learn. In the second part, the teacher provides all that scaffolding and supports the instruction in groups. So it might be that they're all doing it, but they've got a partner they can talk to about that. The students collaborate with their peers on the learning task, and at this point, they're really consolidating that learning. They're watching not only the teacher, but they're watching what each other are doing. In the we do it instruction, this is where the teacher does a lot of the talking as they go through with the students, and you've got their formative assessment. That's where a lot of the questioning or what the teacher is seeing in the observation is informing the information and the guidance and the scaffolding that he or she is applying. And then the last one, you do it alone. This is where the teacher provides feedback and evaluates the student on their performance. But here the student is actually applying the new learning. And while they're doing that, they're thinking about what they're doing and what the teacher had been talking to them about before, but in their head remembering what it is that they were doing. As I said, you've got inquiry-based learning, normally starts with a question. They then investigate, create something, might be a project, it might be a model, it could be a diagram, could be lots of things. Then everyone discusses it to have a look at, you know, do you have all the information there? Is there something that's missing? And then you go back and reflect. Now, this would actually be along the lines of the scientific model that even scientists today use. So as you can see, teachers have a wonderful repertoire of skills and approaches that they can use in their teaching. You've got cooperative learning here, and with the cooperative learning, you've got students who are developing social skills, they're doing the work themselves, they are working together, they've each got responsibility, they're able to work out any conflict, they make decisions together. And this cooperative learning and the cooperative way in which they're learning and working is reflective of what a lot of workplaces have as current practice today. So we do learn an awful lot from watching other people and to listening to what they do. And so this is part of what we also do in our classrooms. I've thrown this one in here too because this approach is what we use particularly in maths. And the approach here is we start with concrete, we move to the pictorial, then we move to the abstract. And so these are stages that you really can't skip. And I suppose for parents, particularly in the lower primary, it's important to understand this process and the importance of moving particularly through these three stages. So you'll see in prep and year one, they'll often do a lot of work with their blocks. They'll be going, I've got two, oh, I've got another one here, how many would I have? Now there's nothing on the board here. This is where it's all about talking about maths. I've got one more, I've got two more, I've got two less. Oh, you've got two, I've got two. What happens if we add them together? So there's an awful lot of doing that to the point that students start understanding those concepts of more, less, if I add on, or I found, all of that language that goes with that, but they're all doing it with their hand, they're actually seeing it and can count it. What we then do is we introduce the pictorial stage of this, and this is where we're starting to move to more abstract. So as you can see there, you've got 2 + 1. But what we would start doing on the board now is we'd start putting up the pictures of it. Now they would still be doing it with the concrete that supports this pictorial stage. And so here you've got got 2 blocks and you've got the other one that you've added, but it also might be on a number line. It might be in a 10 frame. They're all the things that they're still doing, and it's the picture of it. Now, all this is done well before that foundation is laid very, very well before we move into anything abstract such as numerals and plus, equal, divide or multiply stages. Symbols, sorry. So it's important that here that once they get to that stage, the students would then have that supported still with the concrete, still with the picture, before we take all of that kind of the crutch that they have or that support that they have to move towards that abstract. And the abstract is just like reading our numbers and our letters. So it's decoding that what does 2 really mean, and you'll see that they'll do an awful lot of number sense on the sense of 2 or what is 3. And you'll see here too that this abstract format with a few things on one side with an equal sign being balanced by 3 is actually a balanced equation. And so what we're doing even in prep and year 1 is forming the basis for a lot of high level maths that they will do later on in their high school years. The learning intentions are really important because they set the focus for the lesson, and they tell the students this is what we're intending you to learn in this lesson. So as they move through, the students are actually actively participating and looking for this focus so that they know that that's what they should be able to do by the end of the lesson, or this is what the intent is. So it's usually setting out what a student should be able to know, understand, or be able to do by the end of the lesson. The success criteria is often listed there as well. And the success criteria lets the student know when they've achieved the level or the standard that was set for their learning for that lesson or series of lessons. So sometimes there might be a learning intention that might go for 2 to 3 lessons. And so here you've got one, and it's a success criteria for a strong response to a writing prompt about cause and effect relationships in information texts or informative texts. And there's 3 boxes there that we want the students to be able to see in their work that this is what we want you to do at the end of the writing. Now, of course, this might take a week or more to do this. So we'd want them to have a strong topic sentence that restates the prompt, that there was some cause or an effect was a result of a cause, that there was strong supporting detail from the text, not what they are making up themselves, but what they've got particularly from the text that can support the topic sentence, and that they are using evidence from the text to show and use what the text says. So they're the things that they need to be able to show to say that they have succeeded in this lesson. So all of this is about what our beliefs are about how students learn and how we can best support their learning and provide the greatest amount of success for our students and those improved outcomes across the school. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this evening, and just know our teachers are incredibly experienced. They know all about this. So if you want to have another discussion or want to know about something more, please, I'm happy to speak to you, but I know our staff also can relate particularly to the age group that they are teaching or that your daughter's in. Thank you.